Her hand connected with my cheek before I even saw it coming. I felt my daughter's tiny fist tighten around my finger, a reflex like she knew. The sting bloomed hot and sharp across my face, and for one full second, the only sound in that kitchen was the hum of the refrigerator and my own heartbeat slamming in my ears. I didn't drop her. I didn't cry out. I just stood there 11 days postpartum, holding 6 pounds of my whole world against my chest, staring at the woman who raised the man I married. She wasn't finished. She leaned in close enough that I could smell her perfume, heavy, floral, expensive, and said the words low like a secret between us. Shut her up or get out of my house. My daughter wasn't even crying yet. I want you to remember that line, because by the end of this story, it's going to mean something very different to her than it did to me that night. My name is Mara Ellison. I'm 34 years old, and 11 days before that slap, I gave birth to my first child, a daughter named Josephine. I didn't grow up with money. I grew up in a 2-bedroom rental in Dayton, Ohio, with a mother who cleaned office buildings at 5 a.m. and a father who wasn't around long enough to matter. By 26, I had a business degree, $40,000 in student debt, and a plan. By 31, I had built that plan into something real. A boutique event logistics company called Ellison & Cole, which by the time of that slap was billing $1.4 million a year and employed 11 people. I met my husband, Daniel Whitfield, at a vendor conference in Chicago. He was warm, funny, and I'll admit it, came from money I didn't understand yet. His family owned Whitfield Grove, a 52-acre pecan and citrus estate in Central Florida that had been in the family for 3 generations, along with a controlling stake in a regional agricultural distribution company worth, according to the documents I would later find, just north of $9 million. Daniel's mother, Patricia Whitfield, never approved of me. Not once, not for a single day of the 6 years we dated and married. She called me practical, the way other people say poor. She asked me at our engagement dinner, in front of 11 guests, whether I'd signed anything to protect the family's interests. I laughed it off then. I wouldn't be laughing for long. When Josephine was born, Daniel and I were staying at Whitfield Grove for 6 weeks while our new house closed. Patricia insisted. Family helps family, she said. I should have known that sentence had an asterisk on it the size of a house. The stakes by the time of the slap were bigger than my pride. Daniel's father, Robert Whitfield, had passed 18 months earlier, and his will, I would come to learn, left the disposition of Whitfield Grove and its holding company shares partially contingent on a family stability clause that Patricia controlled as trustee for 5 more years. $9 million. My daughter's future. My husband's inheritance. All of it, technically, in the hands of the woman who had just backhanded me while I held our newborn. It started 3 days before the slap, at what Patricia called a small welcome gathering for the baby. Small, in Patricia's vocabulary, meant 40 guests, a caterer, and a photographer she'd hired without asking me. I came downstairs in the only outfit that fit me, soft, forgiving, unglamorous, carrying Josephine in a wrap against my chest. Patricia was standing by the fireplace in a cream silk dress, a champagne flute in hand, holding court with 3 women I didn't recognize. "Oh, she came down," Patricia said, not quite under her breath, but not quite to me either. "I told you, didn't I, that she'd wear something like that?" No sense of occasion. One of the women laughed, a short, polite laugh the kind people give when they're not sure if they're allowed to. Patricia didn't stop. "Daniel could have had anyone," she continued, swirling her glass. "Anyone. And he brings home a girl who runs errands for other people's weddings." I stood on the 3rd stair, Josephine's warm weight against my chest, and I said nothing. I told myself it was exhaustion. It wasn't. It was the first crack in a wall I didn't know I'd need. Later that night, I found Daniel in the study, and I told him what I'd heard. He rubbed his face and said, "She's just stressed since Dad died. Let it go, Mara. Please." I let it go. I shouldn't have. 2 days after the party, I went looking for Josephine's birth certificate copy, which I'd left in a folder on the study desk for the pediatrician's office. It was gone. In its place was a folder I didn't recognize, left open, clearly by accident, clearly not meant for me. Inside were photocopies of financial disclosure forms, my financial disclosure forms, the ones I'd signed years earlier for a routine mortgage pre-approval Daniel and I had done together. Attached to them in Patricia's handwriting was a note. Confirmed no independent assets beyond the business. Good. I photographed every page with my phone before putting the folder back exactly as I'd found it. I asked Patricia carefully why she had copies of my financial documents. She didn't blink. Estate counsel requires a full family financial picture for trust administration compliance, dear. It's standard fiduciary due diligence under the trust instrument. You'd understand if you'd ever dealt with a trust of this size. She said it fast, fluent, the way people talk when they've rehearsed it in the mirror. I nodded slowly. Of course. That makes sense. I even thanked her. I didn't believe a word of it. That night, once the house was quiet, I called my old college roommate, Priya Nakamura, who'd become an estate attorney in Tampa. I read her the note verbatim. Priya went quiet for a long moment, then said, "Mara, that's not compliance language. That's someone building a case that you have no independent financial standing, probably for a prenup ratification or worse, a competency or custody angle. Get me copies of anything else you find." I started looking. Carefully. Slowly. Like someone defusing something. 4 days later, I stood in the hallway outside the kitchen with Josephine asleep on my shoulder, about to walk in, when I heard Patricia's voice and Daniel's younger sister Camille's voice, low and gleeful. "Once the 90 days are up and she hasn't contested residency, Mom's attorney says we can argue she consented to the modified custody framework by default," Camille said, laughing. "She won't even know what hit her. She thinks folding onesies is a full-time job." Patricia laughed too, a real delighted laugh. "She'll fold onesies in a 2-bedroom apartment somewhere, and Daniel will have Josephine every other weekend, and Whitfield Grove stays exactly where it belongs." I stood in that hallway for 11 seconds silent, my daughter's breath warm against my neck, before I turned around and walked away. Priya cross-referenced the modified custody framework language against the trust documents Daniel had once shown me in passing. What she found wasn't a custody scheme at all, that was cover. The actual document was a residency and fitness clause buried in the trust addendum Robert Whitfield had signed 8 months before he died. At a point when, according to 2 separate medical billing records Priya was able to trace through public probate filings, he'd already been diagnosed with the early stages of vascular dementia. Patricia wasn't just trying to push me out. She was trying to manufacture a paper trail proving I was an unfit, unstable presence in the household, dated and backdated to justify invoking a clause that, if triggered, would let her as trustee indefinitely delay any distribution to Daniel at all, keeping full control of $9 million in her own hands for years. My exile wasn't the goal. It was the mechanism. I made a decision that night, sitting on the edge of the guest bed with Josephine asleep in the bassinet beside me. I wasn't going to fight Patricia head-on. Not yet. I was going to become exactly what she already believed I was. Small. Overwhelmed. Grateful. Harmless. The next morning, I let my hair go unwashed. I wore the same soft gray cardigan 2 days running. I let my voice go thin and apologetic. "I'm sorry, I'm just so tired I can barely think straight." Every time Patricia corrected me on something trivial, folding a towel wrong, warming a bottle too hot, I started carrying a small spiral notebook everywhere, the kind you'd use to jot down feeding times, and I let Patricia see me forget things I hadn't actually forgotten. Inside I was doing math. Every conversation Patricia had in front of me now, she had in front of someone she believed was too exhausted and too intimidated to understand it. I let her believe that. It cost me nothing but my pride, and I'd already decided my pride wasn't worth as much as my daughter's future. Daniel noticed the change and asked if I was okay. "I'm just tired," I told him. It wasn't entirely a lie. Priya helped me build it properly and legally. In the state of Florida, one-party consent to record a conversation you're a participant in is legal. I made sure of that before I did anything else. I bought a small, unremarkable baby monitor, the kind with a camera, and set it up in the nursery, angled to also cover the adjoining sitting room where Patricia liked to hold her family meetings with Camille and occasionally Daniel. I told everyone it was for Josephine. I also left the financial folder exactly where I'd found it, but this time I added one new document to the stack quietly on a Tuesday afternoon. A printed email forwarded from Priya's firm, showing that I had, in fact, retained independent legal counsel. I wanted to see what Patricia would do when she believed the harmless daughter-in-law had teeth. Then I waited. My phone, set to silent, buzzed under the folded laundry in the nursery 3 separate times over the next 5 days. Each time my heart went up into my throat. Each time I forced myself to fold one more onesie before I let myself check the feed. On the 6th day, Patricia found the email. I watched her read it on the monitor feed from my phone while pretending to nurse Josephine in the next room. My pulse a drumbeat in my ears. Patricia's voice, tight and controlled, called for Camille. "She's smarter than I gave her credit for," Patricia said. "We move up the timeline. I want this handled before Robert's memorial dinner Saturday. In front of everyone, so there's no ambiguity about the family's position. I had my venue. She'd chosen it for me." Saturday came fast. Robert Whitfield's memorial dinner filled the great room at Whitfield Grove with 40-some guests. Cousins, business partners, the family's estate attorney, a few of Robert's old friends from the co-op board. White tablecloths. Candles. A string quartet Patricia had hired because of course she had. I wore real clothes that night. I washed my hair. I put Josephine in her father's arms and I sat at the far end of the table, calm, upright, watching. Patricia waited until the dessert course, when the room had gone soft with wine and nostalgia, to strike. She stood, tapped her glass, and said she wanted to say a few words about protecting what Robert built. "This family has always understood that legacy requires stewardship," she said, her eyes finding mine down the table. "Sometimes that means recognizing when someone doesn't belong in the picture. I've asked our attorney, Mr. Halloway, to be here tonight because I think it's time we formalize a few things, for Josephine's sake." Camille smiled into her wine glass. Daniel looked at his hands. I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I never have needed to. "Before Mr. Halloway starts formalizing anything," I said, "I think everyone at this table deserves to hear what's actually been happening in this house for the last 3 weeks. I set my phone on the table, connected to the small speaker I'd tested twice that afternoon, and I played 11 seconds of Patricia's kitchen laughter. "She'll fold onesies in a 2-bedroom apartment somewhere," followed by Camille's voice explaining the modified custody framework. The room went silent enough to hear the candle flames. "That conversation," I said, "was recorded legally in a one-party consent state, in a room I was legally present in. I have the full file, along with copies of the financial disclosures Patricia collected on me without my consent, and the trust addendum Robert signed 8 months before his death, after his vascular dementia diagnosis, which I have his own treating physician's billing records to confirm." Patricia's face had gone the color of the tablecloth. "That is a private family matter, and you have no right." "I have every right," I said, calm, quiet, precise. "Because 11 days after I gave birth to your granddaughter, you slapped me across the face while I held her, and told me to shut her up or get out of your house. I have 3 witnesses to that moment, and I have you on tape for days later, planning to use a falsified competency framework to steal my daughter's inheritance out from under my husband." Mr. Halloway, the family attorney, had gone very still. He set down his fork. "Patricia," he said slowly, "is this true about the addendums dating?" I reached into my bag and set the original folder on the table, the one with my financial disclosures and Patricia's handwritten note, and beside it, the printed medical billing timeline Priya had compiled. Then, without raising my voice at all, I picked up the folder Patricia had built to destroy me, and I tore it once, cleanly, down the middle, and set the 2 halves on the white tablecloth in front of her. "You don't get to write my daughter's future in a folder I'm not allowed to read," I said. "Not anymore." Robert's oldest friend, a retired judge named Everett Combs, cleared his throat from the far end of the table. "Halloway, I believe you have an obligation to report attempted trust fraud regarding a diagnosed party's competency to the probate court." Tonight, if what I just heard is accurate. It was accurate. Mr. Holloway made the call from the hallway 40 minutes later. Within 6 weeks, the consequences arrived like dominoes falling in order. Patricia Whitfield was removed as trustee of the Whitfield Family Trust by emergency probate order, after Mr. Holloway's disclosure and Priya's documentation were reviewed by a court-appointed special master. The backdated addendum was invalidated. A successor corporate trustee was appointed in her place. Camille Whitfield, facing her own exposure for participating in what the special master's report called a coordinated effort to construct a false incompetency narrative, lost her position on the Family Distribution Company's junior board, a seat she'd held largely as a courtesy. 2 business partners quietly ended their association with her within the month. Patricia's social standing, which had always mattered to her more than almost anything, collapsed faster than the legal proceedings did. The country club committee she'd chaired for 9 years asked for her resignation within 2 weeks, citing conduct unbecoming. After word of the memorial dinner spread through a social circle that, it turned out, loved gossip more than it loved Patricia. Daniel, for his part, spent the better part of 2 months in a fog of grief and disbelief about his own mother, and I let him have that time without pushing him toward me or away from her. He filed, alongside me, to have the trust's fitness clause struck permanently. It was the one act of grace I insisted on. I asked Mr. Holloway to make sure the household staff at Whitfield Grove, Rosa, who had worked there 14 years, and 2 seasonal groundskeepers, kept their positions and back pay regardless of how the trust reorganized. None of them had done anything but show up and work. Patricia's fall wasn't theirs to pay for. Mr. Holloway made sure of it in writing. It was late November, 9 weeks after the dinner, when Patricia showed up at the door of the small rental house Daniel and I had moved into while our new home finished construction, the same 2-bedroom apartment she'd once mocked, said with such certainty in that kitchen. It was raining hard, the kind of cold Florida rain that catches people off guard. Patricia stood on the porch without an umbrella, her coat soaked through, a single suitcase beside her. The court-appointed trustee had frozen her discretionary spending pending final review, and she'd been asked, politely but firmly, to vacate the main house at Whitfield Grove while the estate was reorganized. "Mara," she said, and her voice had none of the silk left in it, "I have nowhere else. Please. I'm your daughter's grandmother." I stood in the doorway with Josephine on my hip, 3 months old now, reaching a small hand toward the porch light. I thought about the sting of that slap. I thought about the folder. I thought about 11 seconds of laughter in a kitchen. "You told me to shut her up or get out of your house," I said, quiet even. "I'm not going to raise my voice at you the way you did to me. I'm just going to tell you now. You can call Daniel about visitation through his attorney like everyone else in this family now does. But you don't get to stand at this door." I closed it gently and I locked it. Daniel came up behind me a moment later, wrapped his arms around both me and Josephine, and rested his forehead against the back of my head. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see her clearly," he said. "You see her now," I said. "That's what matters." Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, it was warm and quiet and finally entirely mine. Here's what I learned. People who need you to look weak in order to feel powerful will always show you exactly who they are. You just have to be patient enough and calm enough to let them. Real strength was never about the volume of my voice. It was about the quality of my evidence, and the steadiness of my hands while I gathered it. If someone in your family ever tells you to shrink yourself, don't fight them loud. Watch them closely instead. If you've ever had to play weak to protect the people you love, tell me about it in the comments. I read every one. And if this story hit home for you, hit like, subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.